gospel today is from Luke 24, 13 to 35. It is a long one, so continue to stay seated. Now on that same day, 2 disciples. So this is still Easter day. Last week, Marisa led us into the upper room, John 20, as the disciples were locked away on Easter day. Even though they had heard that Jesus was alive, they were locked away for fear. We are now in the Gospel of Luke. There has been word that Jesus is alive, and we are meeting 2 people who are heading out of town. Now, on that same day, 2 disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What were you discussing with each other while you were walking along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place here in these days?" Jesus asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find the body there, they came back and told us that they were indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were there with us went to the tomb and found just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then Jesus said to them, "Oh, you, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them all the things about himself in the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, Jesus walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So Jesus went in to stay with them. When he was with them at the table, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and Jesus vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions together. And they were saying, "The Lord is risen. He has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. The Gospel of the Lord. Grace, mercy, and peace to you from the triune God, creator, liberator, and sustainer of all life. Amen. Cole Arthur Riley, one of my favorite authors, wrote this: "Grief is the response to loss, but is also an act of resistance. To grieve is to refuse to pretend that everything is fine." Grief, for me, is like a dense fog. It can consume us and distort our perceptions of reality. Grief can numb us and keep us from paying attention. One minute, this happened for me. One minute I was on the phone talking, to someone on the couch, and then the next I was standing in the garage holding a piece of paper. I had no idea how I got there and what this even piece of paper was. We grieve so many things: the loss of a job, a dream, a love, a sense of security, civil liberties, a relationship, a beloved pet. And when grief is thick, and like one knows in their bones that everything is not fine, well, people can unconsciously sometimes try to subdue the pain and make really irrational decisions. Quit their job, sell their house, cuss out a random person at the grocery store. I don't know who's ever done that. Move across the country. Or in my case, go to the mall and do laps for hours. I was carrying so much grief, fear and loss that I could barely breathe. There was nothing I could do to change my circumstances. I was powerless, and I was like sick with sorrow. So much so that I drove to a mall, and I just started walking in circles. I didn't go into a store. I didn't buy a coffee like I usually do. I didn't window shop. I just walked. And I'm sure I was a sight. Like tears streaming down my face. My body was like on autopilot. I was taking steps forward, but my heart was convinced that the world had ended. When have you experienced grief? And how did it show up for you? In our Easter text today, Cleopas and an unnamed disciple are still in a fog of grief. They are depleted and exhausted. And I think they just need an escape. Like the last week in Jerusalem has been horrific. They have witnessed the unjust trial, the brutal torture, and the death of their rabbi and friend Jesus. They have watched Jesus die a public death, and like on a cross. And I imagine that they heard all the mocking and the jeers, the crowd. I imagine that they also heard the women sobbing as they brought his body down from the cross and he was laid in a tomb. Like, maybe that was still echoing in their ears. Like, so much to take in. And then 3 days later, there are reports, first from the women and then from the men of the disciples, who say that he might be alive. What? Like, there is so much to process, and what are they to believe? If I were them, I would have felt like everyone else had really kind of lost it, and it was grief-induced magical thinking. So what do? They turn to one another and say, "You want out of here? Ready to go? Emmaus, sound good?" And so they go. It's curious that scholars have not been able to pinpoint where Emmaus is. So archaeologically, they don't know. Like, there was one map that I had, and it just had this huge spread of options. One ancient text says it was 7 miles away. Another ancient text says it's 19 miles away. That's a pretty big difference. I think for Cleopas and their friend, they were just thankfully Emmaus was not Jerusalem. They needed to go somewhere, and so they start walking. And as they're walking, they are processing every heart-wrenching detail of their last week. And then a stranger shows up and starts walking with them, and then innocently asks what they're talking about. And then they stop. The text says they stand still. I imagine their jaws dropping. And they're like, it's like, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem that does not know the things that have taken place here in these days?" And then Jesus plays dumb. I'm like, oh, he comes out of the tomb and he is sassy. He's like, "What things?" And then they download every single horrific detail. And Jesus listens. He lets them get it all out. I love how Jesus meets them on this journey. He doesn't meet them at the Sanhedrin. He doesn't meet them in their home. He doesn't meet them in a temple. He meets them on this journey between Jerusalem and Emmaus, between their grief and their acceptance, in the middle of their ambiguity of the resurrection and if it's even real. And I've been struck by 3 words this whole week as I've been preparing. We had hoped. We had hoped. The disciples had hoped that Jesus was the Messiah who was going to liberate them from Roman occupation. And all of their dreams, all of their hopes, all of their expectations, they died on the cross. And the empire's violence did exactly what it was supposed to do. It started to squash all of his followers. And so what do? Some hide away in a locked room, and others just scatter. They head to Emmaus. We had hoped. Have you ever said these words? We had hoped the chemo would work. We had hoped to have time to say goodbye. We had hoped to have enough money to pay our rent. We had hoped the relationship could mend. And we all have our personal we had hoped, but we also all are holding collective we had hoped. And it's a grief. We need to call it what it is. We had hoped the war would have ended by now. We would have hoped to protect our national parks. We would have hoped for protection for our neighbors, especially our most vulnerable ones. We had hoped for our LGBTQI rights to be upheld and valued. We had hoped for an end to cruelty and violence. We had hoped for justice and racial equity. Oh, there are so many things going on in the world beyond our control. And we might feel like the two disciples and turn to anyone near us and say, "You want to get out of here?" Do you know how many people are looking to leave town, leave their state, leave the country? You want to go to Emmaus anywhere? Richard Rohr writes that the two disciples are in a liminal space between what was and what will be. And the very vulnerability and openness of a liminal space allows room for something genuinely new to come. He writes that when we're in a liminal space, we're empty and we're receptive. Like erased tablets ready for a new word. Liminal space is where we're the most teachable because we're the most humbled. Did you notice that the healing and the hope for Cleopas and this unknown disciple doesn't arrive all at once? And this unnamed disciple, I was reading a commentary, which I loved, that maybe the reason why the unnamed disciple, we don't know their name, is because we're supposed to see ourselves in the story. Healing, hope, it's gradual, like little steps on the journey. First, the stranger just simply walks up with them, then starts to ask questions, listens, taking in every hope-shattered detail. This stranger serves as a compassionate companion, holding the full weight of their story. And then incognito Jesus opens the scriptures for them. I don't love the part when he says, you fools. He kind of like calls them out. I don't even know what to do with that, honestly, other than he's just irritated at the moment. But then he starts to unpack the heart of God. It says he starts from Moses, and then he goes through all of the prophets. And let me tell you, I lean toward Emmaus being 19 miles away because that is a lot of content to Jesus to go through. So Jesus lays it all out, and he helps them reframe and understand all of the scriptures. And their own understanding of God starts to expand, but yet they still can't recognize Jesus. Luke says their eyes are kept from seeing. It's only when they stop for the night and they notice that the stranger's going to keep on going, and they insist, stay with us, it's nearly evening and the day is almost over. The disciples, they offer this hospitality and this welcome. I mean, even as they have, I can't imagine how exhausted they are. Like, this is the Easter day, they have had all of this happen, and they now have walked 7 to 19 miles, who knows how long. But they open the door, they set a table, they invite this stranger in to come and to be with them. Like, they're embodying the acts of love that Jesus had taught his disciples. They're actually doing the thing that he had sent them to go and to do. And as they sit down, as they practice their faith, as they start to share their food, Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and then they see who he is. And then Jesus vanishes. It's so dramatic, isn't it? He pops in, he pops out, he's showing up. But what happens for them at that moment, they turn toward one another and they are stunned and they say, were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us? So what do? They get up and they start walking back to Jerusalem. I love this little fact that their hearts were already burning, but their minds had not caught up yet. Like the wisdom of their body was already sensing that this really might be Jesus, but their minds had not been cleared yet until there was this very act they had done so many times with Jesus of the breaking of the bread, of the sharing in this time of deep, vulnerable intimacy, this moment of being human together, this act of generosity and stewardship that one loaf would feed everyone, that they see. So what do? They get up and they immediately go to Jerusalem. I mean, they have already walked all day long, but they get up and they go back to the hard place, back to the death-dealing forces of the empire, back to the place of grief. Yet their hearts have shifted, and the resurrection promise has now shaped their vision in a new way. I mean, these disciples had been walking with the risen Christ all these miles, and yet they couldn't see Jesus until they entered into these simple, ordinary acts that were a part of their faith. The nourishment, the time together, the companioning, and the simple breaking of bread and sharing it at a meal. In the midst of my walking around the mall, my phone rang. A friend called because she knew I was struggling. I answered and I fell apart. You know that is when the person who holds your heart, we all have people. When your person calls you and you finally go, "Blah!" There I am in the mall, absolutely weeping. And I went through every single detail. I ranted, I cried. I had lost all shame. I didn't care who was noticing me or seeing me. I went through every detail. And she just listened. She just listened. And then she said, "Where are you?" I was like, "I'm at the mall." And she said, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm walking." And she goes, "Well, how long have you been doing this?" And I'm like, "Well, a few hours." And I don't remember exactly what she said. So I can't locate that, but I can tell you what my body remembers. I remember this is the spirit of what she said. She said, "Oh, Kacey, I wish I could be with you right now and give you a huge hug. You must be exhausted, and I'm so sorry. And I think you need some food and some water soon." And then she said, "Can you find some place to sit down?" And in my teariness, I just said, "Okay," and so I went and found a place to sit down. I remember sitting down across from Bath and Body Works. I remember. The smell was emanating out. I sat down and she said, "Just hold on to your heart for a minute." So I held my heart, I closed my eyes, I started to breathe, and then my dear friend prayed for me over the phone. It was so simple. But I realized as she was praying for me that I had been walking for hours and had not yet said a prayer. I was just ruminating and caught up in my grief and my sorrow that I had not gone to a practice that I know so well, that I do often. She helped me remember. And then when we said amen, like the grief was still there. Nothing in my life had really changed. but my heart had shifted. My heart had actually warmed in a way. Because my dear friend, thousands of miles away, had become my companion. And like there was a seed of hope that was planted inside of me. That I could get back into my car, that I could go back to my life, that I could go back to the things that were really hard. My friend, oh, my beloved friend, was Christ for me on my Emmaus loop. So I want to ask you this morning, where is Jesus meeting you on your Emmaus road? Maybe you're mid-journey or somewhere between Jerusalem and Emmaus. Maybe you're somewhere between a diagnosis and some healing. Maybe you're somewhere in this liminal fog between what was and what your dreaming could be. And Jesus has a habit of showing up there, with you on your road today. And it can sometimes look so simple, like a friend giving you a call, or someone else saying, hey, you want to go grab a bite to eat, and after church you go and share a meal together. It can look as simple as you just being invited into coming and sharing in communion and you haven't been for a long time. It could be turning toward your neighbor and noticing that they are having a difficult time, and you offer them care, and you turn toward them and set a table for them. And in the midst of it, you encounter Christ. Sometimes we recognize Christ well after the encounter. And then you find yourself saying, maybe even turn to someone and say, was not your heart burning? Yours too, mine. The hope of Easter is that we are accompanied through our grief and our unknowns and the things that we cannot control and the things that do not make sense and the things that break our hearts. The risen Christ comes and meets us there and reminds us that we are not alone in our walking and our grieving and our listening and our raging and our welcoming of strangers and being welcomed by strangers, and in the breaking of the bread and the returning again to the hard places. Like that's resurrection hope. That we are actually given enough strength and hope and encouragement to go back to the places that are hard. That is the holy work of the Spirit. That is Jesus coming to come and be with us. And as we practice, as we walk, as we faithfully continue to listen and serve and participate in these practices of the disciples, even when we are tired, even when we feel spent and we don't have anything more, slowly and gradually, step by step, our eyes will continue to open. And thanks be to God, we will see Christ. Amen.